they thought it wasn't possible before the pandemic. That's really the key. It was possible, Renee, technically, but in their mindset, they didn't think that it would be either good or technically possible. And now I think it's here.
It's time to get inside your own head. Begin with the psychology behind your behaviors. Infuse it with an acute understanding of self-awareness, emotion, storytelling, body language, and more. Then look at it all through the lens of the latest neuroscience research, broken down to its most digestible form. And you've arrived. Enhanced messaging, deeper connection, heightened influence, and a greater impact on the world. Welcome to the Amplify Podcast with Renee Rodriguez.
All right, welcome to this episode of the Amplify Podcast. And I'm excited today because we get to talk about something that I secretly nerd out about constantly, which would be tech and virtual meetings. And if you followed me in any way, shape, or form, you saw sort of our transition in March 2020 when they canceled the MBA to moving virtually and building the studio that you see here and see in our trainings. And I was at a conference this couple weeks ago at NSA, the National Speakers Association, called Influence. Pretty cool name, I'd say. And I had a gentleman approach me there who showed me this book, and immediately I got excited. Book is how to create engaging virtual meetings, written by Wiley. So he's a brother of mine at Wiley Publishing. Wiley doesn't just take on any books, they only take on the best. John Chen is the author of the #1 best-selling book, new release for engaging virtual meetings. He's been meeting for 38 years. Okay, this is somebody who's done virtual. COVID didn't start him like it did me. He's been doing this for 38 years. He worked at Microsoft doing it at the highest levels. He's produced over 4,000 virtual meetings, including one that had 8 languages. I can imagine the cluster that might have been. And the only 100% live virtual conference in the training industry. That's pretty cool. He's also one of only 400 CSPs, or what we call certified speaking professionals. It's designated by National Speakers Association. That's actually a really big deal. And so please, let's welcome Mr. John Chen. John, thanks for being on here today.
Thank you so much, Renee. Calling in live from Seattle, Washington. So excited to see you in Denver at Influence and ready to, what we talked about, nerd out on how good virtual can be if you do it right.
I love that. And I can tell by where you're looking, I got to ask you, do you have some sort of keyboard in front of you or a switchboard? What do you got? Because I want to see what's going on. I know you added the element of music, which, by the way, if you're listening to this, the music is such an underutilized piece because music triggers emotions. It can trigger memories. It changes the look and the feel and the vibe of everything that you watch. And so tell me about what you got going on there.
Well, Renee, if you don't mind, can I just take 3 minutes to share? I'm going to share my last 4 years in 3 minutes so that I can give you a tour of all the stuff. Does that sound good?
Let's do it.
Okay, so I wrote a book called Engaging Virtual Meetings with our good friends John Wiley and Sons. But how did I get here? Well, I had an illustrious career in geocaching. Renee, do you know what geocaching is?
It's got to be something with location and tracking location.
Yeah, it's a high-tech scavenger hunt. It basically used billions of dollars of global positioning satellites to find hidden objects or items around. And I turned it into a team-building event. And been doing it since 2001, and I was up to about 160 events around the world in beautiful places like Barcelona, Taiwan, Shanghai, Marseille, France, Renee. And then, of course,
would it be kind of like Pokemon Go?
Oh, this is like corporate Pokemon Go.
That's so cool.
Where you teach team and leadership skills. But then, of course, this thing happened, and Renee knows this story intimately. March of 2020, of course, the coronavirus shows up, all right, and this is what my March of 2020. So I don't think I had 100 like you, but I definitely had 15 in March of 2020, all canceled all at once. And one of my strategies, though, Renee, so there's love that you are in the brain part. Right? That's where I really enjoyed watching you speak at Influence and at Thrive, is that one of my strategies when faced with uncertainty is to look at the past. All right. So now, Renee, we're talking OG, right? Do you remember any idea what this thing was?
Prodigy. I remember that name for sure.
Prodigy was the first graphical-based meeting space online at a time when modems used to make noise, right? And so, And so I was on it. And that means that that's part of how I've been looking at virtual meetings, for over 38 years is looking, how is it changing people? What's going on? In fact, I even in 2011, this is my first John Wiley and Sons book, 50 Digital Team Building Games. So I wrote that in 2011 on top of all that. But the funny part, Renee, is that nobody would buy it.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, yeah, they didn't. Well, who was thinking going digital? Right? We were all in person, and which is why I think I got excited around COVID because people say, Renee, you just lost 100 events. Why are you smiling? I said, well, it's not my first time. I lost them all, everything basically in 9/11.
Right.
And I said, the one thing I do know for sure is that people are going to panic and they're going to get scared, but those that thrive are going to be super innovative right now. And so you're going to watch a lot of innovation. And I go, and we have to be one of them. And so, yeah, I can only imagine before there was the need, this creative idea of digital team building, people were like, nah, let's just do it in person, which created the paradigm that everybody thinks you cannot connect virtually. You can't build trust virtually. And here I was doing these in-person boot camps, teaching people to speak on stage and transforming life stories and all these things. And then I spent 6 weeks and recreated it virtually. And they were convinced it couldn't happen. And I said, here's the thing. We watch full-length movies with our entire family. We
Yeah.
binge watch our favorite TV shows and are sad when it's over.
Yeah.
And that happens on a tiny little box. Some of us do it on our iPads. But something happens that our periphery goes away when a good story happens. I remember during that time, I called Harvard because I knew they were doing some research on this. And I have some connections over there. And I said, what are we trying to solve for on Zoom and virtual? And they said, Renee, it's one thing. It's disassociation. I said, okay, like how the virtual killer disassociate, or not the virtual killer, but the serial killer disassociates from their victim. Kinda. Well, you show up on camera, you got horrible lighting, audio's poor, there's no movement, there's nothing dynamic about it. And so people in essence disassociate from you to focus on other things more engaging, like their phone or email or other things. And I was like, interesting. So we have to use all of the knowledge and science we have around capturing attention, but use it virtually. I love it.
So, well, that's a good transition because Renee, we got to break out of the screen in all these different ways.
And this is one of those I'm going to say that we're going to have to watch visually as well, because there's a lot of visual elements to this one.
Yeah, and I'll give you some audio cues maybe about what's happening. It's good on the inclusivity side, Renee, is like, and the inclusion is like having audio descriptions along the journey. But I think too, Renee, the thing that I'm most interested in, that I think you have some specialty in too, is that the neural pathways for everyone was the default, right? Like we know that there's 80% of the world that was like, oh, this is terrible. What am I going to do? There's no way to replace these things, right? And there's this 20% of the world that's like, this is a new opportunity. We've been waiting, like I love to tell people, I'm the best 28-year, overnight success you ever met, right? Which is I've been preparing for this, but nobody would buy it until this moment. So I went on and I put a class on Eventbrite called Virtual Team Building. One thought really around that, Renee, is that, how can we help people when there are so many people who are having challenges right now? And I'm like, well, I think I have something. So I put this class up on Eventbrite. 5,000 people took it, Renee, by the end of 2020. And so I good friends at John Wiley and Son called back and they said, hey, John, do you want to write your second book? And I'm like, sure, let's do that. But and Renee, Wiley, this in the cruelest joke that Wiley played, I felt like they played on me. They said, John, we have no idea how long this coronavirus thing's going to last, right? Will you rush the book?
Yeah.
Not knowing I had 4.5 years or more to write this book. I wrote this book, Renee, in 9 weeks.
Wow.
60,000 words.
That's a lot. That's a lot.
Yeah.
And so talk to me about how, because part of the challenge I have is, we built a studio, but over 4 years, this has grown to be $100,000 plus studio that we're in.
Yeah.
We had
Yeah.
8 cameras, 23 lights, everything's digital controlled, nothing here. I record on 1080. Like the content creation is amazing. We host 1,000, 2,000 people virtual meetings, and all in my one room here.
Yes.
But all of that can feel unattainable. Like you got music playing, you got your virtual backdrops that have slides that you can go through and control. How do we start? And what would you say? And I've got my thoughts on this too, for the person that's finally catching on or saying, you know what, how do I raise the game just a little bit to start standing out?
Renee, like all change too, right? I think your studio is the result of thousands of failures. Is that true?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Well, you know how many videos I have? I think there are 400 of me going, how's this sound? How about now? How about now? How about now? Can you hear me? This is not microphone placement here. What if I place it here? Okay. What about lighting here? Hundreds of videos like
Right.
that. Yeah.
So that's the one part. And so what I always encourage people is like, we're about to show, Renee, both and I are going to show some aspects of our studio, and it can be intimidating. And like all great performers, right? That is the culmination of thousands of failures. So my number one tip for anybody who's watching this is improve one thing, whether it's your camera or your audio. And your audio is probably first, right? Renee has definitely
Agreed.
identified that. You got to have great audio or
Yes.
nobody cares. And then you got to vary your voice or, change what's going on, the dynamics of your range. So part of it is you too, Renee. You have to be different on here. These are things like this. A lean into the camera is now really effective, right? Where in person it would feel different, or you might have to do something different. So you have to learn what are the techniques that are different here in virtual than in person. They're similar, but they're slightly different enough, right? So
And
your
I want to
internet.
and I want to point out too, like to the audience, if you're listening to this, please watch the video because you'll watch that John uses his hands a lot. And he ensures that his hands are within view. And usually the hands are not in view on virtual because we hold them sort of towards our waist and things, and you can't see them. So it's making sure that hands are in view. So I just want to make sure that people are listening. Make sure you watch this because this is going to be critical.
And Renee, one of the cool parts is that if you watched on LinkedIn, there's a program called the Neuroscience of Virtual Selling. And it says that if you don't show your hands at least once during a virtual call, assuming your camera's on, your attendee is 20% less likely to trust you or buy from you. Just showing your hands. Just
That's
showing your
huge.
hands.
That's
So,
huge.
I finished this book, right? I wrote it in 9 weeks, and I got it out there. And then when I released it in October 2020, hit the #1 Amazon hot new release. Book number 20,000 just came out. I know some of our Wiley friends have sold 6 million books. Let me just tell you though, if you hit 20,000, you're way above average. That the average for an author in America is 300 books.
Yeah.
So if you can get out,
20,000 is a big deal.
yeah, 10, 20,000, that's a big deal. And so then I was able to redesign my whole business in under a year. So now the majority of my work, Renee, is not team building. It is planning, producing, speaking at, and emceeing at virtual, now hybrid, and I'm back to in-person meetings. These are some fun people I worked with. Another Wiley author, this is Patrick Lencioni. This is Jay Bhattacingha, the author of The Walking Dead. This is our good friend Damon John from the Shark Tank. And this is Elizabeth Gilbert, who sold 16 million books. If you don't remember the name, the book was Eat, Pray, Love, and then Julia Roberts played her on a movie. And so now, Renee, I got to get to the studio part. This is my #1 tip for virtual speakers. Renee, is it okay if I show this to you?
Please.
Here we go.
So now he's standing. There we go.
Standing up, I'm walking backwards. This is the view that you almost never see on virtual. And the tip is stand up.
Yeah. And so now
the fun part
so if you're watching, what I'm watching is your backdrop stayed the same. You didn't get blurred out like a lot of times those virtual backdrops do. And it looks like you're standing on stage. And so what is that you're literally standing on stage and it's creating the right depth of field and
it's a three-dimensional illusion, basically.
Thank you.
Right?
Three-dimensional. And so, okay, is that a setting in Zoom or is this something different?
So now I'll show what I did with the last of my 4 years here. Is that #1 is behind the scenes. I just built a green screen, but big enough to walk around in. So you got to have the depth around here to do this. And now the second part, Renee, is like, this is how much tech I have in front of me every single day, right? So this is what's happening over here.
Love it. And if you're watching this, we got an overhead shot of him being able to demonstrate. And so couple things that I want to point out here from the listener's perspective. When you're watching this, I'm not saying go out and create everything that John and I have here or go out and create this green screen. He is utilizing virtual to fit his business model and to be able to easily, friction-free demonstrate what he's doing. And so he's got to show the tech is important. He's got to show the versatility. He's got to show that he can make transitions on the fly. He's got camera angles that are pointed in the right direction to show his hands now. He can transition between them to show his stream decks, which is great. But all of those things are for his business model. And so now you can nerd out with me and say, man, okay, what's he using? What's going on there? Or you go, how do I best set up virtual to easily demonstrate what it is that I do? And so I want you to think about it from that perspective. Don't get caught up in the content.
Yes.
Look at what he's accomplishing and then start asking yourself, how do I demonstrate what's most important? Obviously, you have to know what's most important for you. We're going to assume you do. And so then what do you do to be able to demonstrate that versus just having one camera on you with bad lighting, horrible audio, and no backdrop?
So things like this, right? This is an iPad in front of me. This is an iPad over here. Then I can go to a mixing board, and this is one of the ways to have either multiple things, or I can put in sound into any meeting. I don't need the share access of any platform. So I can mix music in, right? And I can also have 4 people here in the studio if I wanted to do a podcast live. And then the thing he was talking about, a stream deck, is from a company called Elgato. And what this is doing is allowing me to produce even though I don't have any here. So one of my top tips, Renee, is never lead a virtual meeting alone. And there are cases where we are, like Renee and I are, sometimes entrepreneurs or solopreneurs. We don't always want to bring in a producer. So in the day-to-day part, you can do things and automate here. I automate text, I automate sounds, and I automate transitions. So like here, if I push this button, I'll come back to Seattle. So those are the things that I've really looked at. And again, testing thousands of different tools, I started to adopt only the ones that I thought would help me in production. And again, back to Renee's part, I'm not buying tech for tech's sake. I'm buying tech to solve a challenge. And what I love too, Renee, is this year I've been talking about technology and technique. There's technology that can solve some of these problems. And in the end, too, you also have to work on your own technique, such as hand motions, such as leaning in, such as varying your vocal qualities. Those are all things that you, the human, can do that don't cost anything.
Yeah, for sure. And I agree. People always want to start with the best camera. And that's not your first purchase. To me, the most important thing, you could be with the client and if that phone doesn't work, the meeting is over. Audio is king. And of course, I was just joking about pretending like the microphone was going out. But and I've had clients fight me on this. So like, Renee, for the virtual meeting, we do these big trainings and I go through a whole technology section. And they're like, Renee, let's get through the tech and let's get past it right into the content. And they'll fight with me and they'll say, well, okay, then what? And I'll do that same thing. And they're like, huh? I'm like, oh, you didn't hear it? And I'll do it again. They're like, I go, unfortunately, Mr. Client, I didn't decide to put tech between us first on the virtual piece, but the world did. So if we don't solve what's first between us, if we don't have good tech, even just simple functional tech, like good internet and good audio, the meeting's over. It doesn't matter how important the meeting is. If you're driving through a mountain and you have no cell service, meeting's over. If you have no web, it doesn't matter how awesome the idea is, the meeting's over. And so for me, audio is number one, and good lighting is the next piece. And then once you have that, then because you can have a great camera with poor lighting, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. And you know what? Cameras are good enough. Now, some of us want to appear differently. I told my guy I wanted to feel like I was on ESPN. I wanted to make sure that there was 1080 and right camera angles and all those things. But you have to be able to do what works for you. And they've got some good, but you can take a decent camera, put good lighting on it, and you're going to be fine. If you don't know lighting, talk to a photographer or a videographer and say, can you create some 3-point lighting in my studio? And you bet you pay them $50 and starving artists will come in there and create it for you. You could spend $200, $150 and get the right lighting. And you can spend $99 up to $300, maybe to $2,000. One of my mics in here is Sennheiser, $1,500 microphone. But yeah. I do that for voiceovers. I do that for bigger meetings. I do that for high-end video. Not everybody needs that. You can just do the things that work for you, but that's what works for me. John has what works for him. For me, the big piece was, how do I build a studio that doesn't require a team? Because I know that like for the thought leader, the entrepreneur, the client that we work with, they have these content days that they're trying to create where they go into a studio. It's not their work environment. They're wearing different clothes. They're trying to pretend to be an actor, which they're a business person. And now they're out of their element and they're supposed to be good on camera. and it just never works. And so to me, it was, okay, how do I just capture the entrepreneur while they're working and being able to do that? And that to me is turning your Zoom setup into something that's worth recording and that you can
Yeah.
actually produce into something really good. What else other challenges, especially, now we're 4 years into it.
Yeah.
Where have people grown and where do they still need to grow?
Well, I do want to let on the show notes too. I gave Renee a link, right, to all the equipment that I'm currently using. It's in categorized by good, better, best. Right, good is like if you are just starting out. Better is if you got a little bit of budget, and the best is if you had an unlimited budget. What would you get, or what would I recommend to you? So make sure and check out the show notes to find that equipment. And again, don't buy it all. Buy it one thing at a time, and watch how your meeting reacts. More importantly, watch how your attendees react. Now, Renee asked about, what's happening now 4+ years after this. And number one is virtual is dead and not dead. And what I mean by that is that virtual, certainly now that the world is reopened up, Renee were able and I to see each other in Denver for the most part, right? Hopefully like swarms of people did. A few people probably got sick, but swarms of people didn't. And so the world is opening up. And as much as I would love to double down on virtual, and some people have, I've had to return back to some parts that are hybrid and in person. So it's a continual adaptation is what I see. And the second part though, Renee, is that the pandemic gave us a gift. And what I mean by that is that, let's see, here's a great example, right? One of my clients had an IT meeting. They have 150 IT managers around the country. And so they were able to meet in person because they got a new director. All right. So that director, they all got to meet that person. And then 6 months later, they say, we went to headquarters saying, we want to meet again. Can you give us the budget to meet in person again? And they told them, no. Because right, budgets are getting cut, right? We want to be careful about spending, at least at this part of the economic cycle. And so they came back and called me and they asked me to help run an all hands meeting that was like 4-hour virtual. And they know that 4-hour virtual is quote unquote a long time, but by bringing somebody in, we were able to cover all the items. And the key goal that they wanted was to keep the momentum going from their in-person meeting. And by the end of the meeting, they said they achieved that. They were able to celebrate some key achievements. They were able to talk about some innovations. They were also able to share people what has changed in the 6 months since then. And they were also able to bond and have fun with each other. We did that all in 4 hours online. And that was probably, they thought it wasn't possible before the pandemic. That's really the key. It was possible, Renee, technically, but in their mindset, they didn't think that it would be either good or technically possible. And now I think it's here. So I think there's really cool and unique things happening. And with that too is hybrid is I'm just curious to see if hybrid is really going to grow. Some people think it's too complicated and too expensive, but we have really cost-effective solutions, and we've seen audiences grow their audience by 50 to 100% by allowing the virtual in because of the content. If the content's really good, Renee, the hybrid audience can really gain some value.
Yeah. If it's done right, what happens is what I've seen is people try to do hybrid and the speaker or the presenter tries to serve both audiences and look at two different areas, the audience and then the camera, and then the audience and the camera. The moment they look at the camera, they alienate the audience and they feel like they're alienating the people that are virtual. But the promise is different virtually than it is live. And what I mean by that is what I tell people, I said, serve the live audience as best as you can and allow the virtual audience to be witness to it and to just watch and to voyeur into the meeting. There's less of a need for you to see me virtually. I don't have that expectation, but a live audience has that expectation. It's like watching a TED talk. And so I think that there's that piece where people get caught up and the speaker gets thrown off. They're going back and forth. They can't do that. And one of the things, if you are a speaker and you're selling these services, we went in the tail end of 2020, we did more business in that 6 months than we did the previous year. And I remember we're showing people, and I had built the studio and I was showing the difference, why I showed the example of, I showed you before of like what it looks like on a webcam versus, a DSLR and with right lighting. And I was charging $25,000 for virtuals. And they're looking, Renee, I don't know how do you justify 25,000. I said, well, let's put it this way. So if you want to do your live event, you got to fly everybody there, get the room costs. You're going to spend $100,000 to $150,000 on production, stages, lighting, cameras, audio, And you got teams. And if you're doing in Vegas, you're going to also have the union to pay. That's going to add a $30,000 to $40,000 on there. You're going to pay $90 a gallon on coffee. Let's not even get started on lighting, fixtures, and everything. Oh, you also have to feed people. Let's say you go with the cheap end donuts. You're going to feed no less than $30 a person, $50 a person if you're going to do lunch. And now, travel, hotel, I can go on and on. You're in the hundreds of thousands of dollars because the production burden falls on you. In the virtual space, production burden falls on me. And so we're doing this for a fraction of the cost. I'm in $100,000 X amount studio. I can change things and make money fall from the sky. I can bring ideas to life. I can do all sorts of things to really demonstrate this. And now they're going, oh, we get it. And I said, okay. And so the approach was really getting people to think differently. And this is the other thing I'll tell you if you're listening. As much as the meeting planner had to think differently, so do you. So did I. Meaning I had to now stop seeing my desk as a desk. My desk now is a set. It's a stage. And so how do I design first my work, and then how do I design studio feel around it, right? Like my backdrop, you'll see that I can do different things with that backdrop. And depending on where I'm at or what is it I'm trying to achieve or what brand I'm promoting at that moment for myself or just what feel. If it's at nighttime, maybe I'll put the skyline behind me, whatever it is. I like the lighthouses like, Minneapolis or whatever it is. I just like to pretend I'm on the beach. And so all of those different elements are part of the set and the stage. And typically I have my book sitting right here in the background, which I took away. But perfect. So all different ways of doing it, but we have to think differently to say, okay, how do I add this component? And if you do that right, every Zoom call becomes potential content that you can put on social media as well. If you record it with good audio and good enough camera, you can multi-purpose it. As we're sort of approaching this next phase, what do you think is going to be the next innovation? What do you think the next use of this? What are the things that you're excited about that, and you want to, you're trying to explore, experiment with? And because I know that we have a vibe board here, and we programmed it where I can actually write on the vibe board and it shows up on my screen in front of me. It shows up on the virtual feed. Some tech involved, some lighting changes need to make that happen. We'll put the new studio in. I opted out of it. But there's so many places we can go with this. I know like holograms are going to be crazy.
Yes.
What do you see coming down the pipe for virtual?
Well, one in the immediate future is definitely this hybrid. Like here in Seattle, I invented something called a hybrid in a box. Let's see, I think I might actually even have, there we go. So hybrid in a box means that one of the problems about hybrid, Renee, is that you got to unplug and replug all these cables somewhere, right? You spend a lot of time in your studio putting stuff together in it. And this hybrid in a box keeps 90% of the cables plugged in because it rolls around in a box. So I pop out the front and the back, turn it into a table, put up the cameras and connect those. And in about 30 minutes, I can actually broadcast in any place. And the win for that is that we did a conference where all three rooms had 3 cameras, 3 monitors, right? 2 wireless mics. And the win for this is because it had 3 breakouts. So 3 simultaneous breakouts were being produced to this high level. And a PhD came back and said, this is the best hybrid I've ever attended. So that's one, is we're making a hybrid affordable and watchable, right? That part that it brings you in. So Renee, I think you said that you want the virtual to be witnessed. One of my goals is to, often as a virtual attendee, you feel like a second-class citizen, like you're in the bottom of the ship, right? As opposed to having a first-class experience. One of my goals is, can I make that virtual person have a first-class experience? And so that's why we use multiple televisions. Number one, we put a television actually right underneath the cameras, and it's either showing the slide or it's showing the gallery so that the speaker can talk right at the audience, and that we can bring people in. So Renee, if you attended my hybrid in a conference that I was running, you could ask a question live. And again, I have a conference coming up with 3 Hall of Fame speakers. So Renee could stay home, click a button, and then ask 3 Hall of Fame speakers any question he wants from home. And we put you on screen, and it looks like you're having a one-on-one conversation like this. That's the next goal that I see for that. And then in the future, I mean, have you seen Howie Mandel's box, which transports a hologram of yourself into a box?
Yeah.
I actually got a chance in LA to go there, and Howie was there. And I think it's possible. The box is still very expensive. And I think there's some parts where that's sooner and sooner we're going to get close to like holodeck feel one day, Renee. And what I mean by that is it'd be great to sit in your office and feel like you're having a meeting or having a keynote, right, with all the people in front of you, and you're still didn't have to travel. At the end of the keynote, you can click a button and be with your kids, whatever is valuable and important in your life. And I think that experience is going to continue to get elevated over the years, where we can do more with less time or less resources. So the last one I really want to add to this too, Renee, is that I hope that technology starts helping us. In other words, it allows us to do things like monitor more attendees, maybe give us a rating of how engaged they are, and allow us to see in real time as a presenter and a facilitator what's landing and what's not, so I can do more of it on the fly. So those are all the things that I think are going to happen in the next year.
I'm so excited for that real-time feedback on what's happening, because I've been looking into that as well. Imagine knowing what, if you're bombing or doing well just based on eye placement. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's so many things that are happening. So John, you have an event coming up in October. The fact you do it every October. Tell us about that event. And you got some pretty cool speakers coming.
It's called the Engaging Conference, Renee, and it really started as a launch from my book in October. So it's every October, every year, and this is the 5th one. And like everything, too, innovation happens when you keep innovating year over year. And so for the first 4 years, it was an all virtual conference, and it's been astounding. Like, we've had growing registration numbers. We had over 1,100 people registered last year. And it's amazing to be able to put on a conference with a fraction of the cost. Now, this year is the first year in going hybrid, so I found an amazing facility here in Seattle, Washington. We're going to bring in the tech because I've been working more and more in hybrid. And this year, too, the one thing I really did even more different than the previous years is the content is something that's so important for engagement. And so I found here in Washington State, we have 3 Hall of Fame speakers: Bill Staten, right, Anna Liata, and Brian Walter. And so these people have been, there's only 125 of them in the National Speakers Association ever. And I got 3 of them. And so if you take world-class talent and they all have committed to say they're going to change their program so that it is optimized for hybrid, you can see how 3 Hall of Famers deal with hybrid. And by the way, Renee, I've been watching the last 4 years. There are many speakers in NSA who don't know what to do in hybrid, right? They get confused, even though they're great speakers, don't get me wrong. But in hybrid, they're not sure that where do I look? Where do I
Yeah.
pay attention? How do I address both the virtual and the in-person audience? And so this conference will really help speakers figure that out and help meeting professionals who want to put on hybrid or putting on hybrid and want to make it better. That's what the Engaging Conference is all about. And Renee has really identified, he says, if you can make something engaging and education and inspiring, that's the mark of a great conference, no matter how you deliver it.
Love it. It's interesting. I worked with a lot of speakers going virtual, and they made the mistake of taking the in live persona and energy to the virtual meeting, which was such a big mistake. And they're like talking to the camera and doing this stuff and trying to be live and energy. And I asked him, I said, how many people are watching you? He said, I got 1,000 people on there. I said, great. Each one of those people, how many are in their room by themselves? He's like, what do you mean? I'm like, there's 1,000 people by themselves, which really means you're talking to one person at a time.
Yeah.
And your voice, and if you're talking and I stand in front of him one-on-one and I start doing those, like, you're going to be, I go, it feels a little weird, doesn't it? And he's like, oh, shoot. And I said, just have a conversation. The tone that I have on virtual is very similar to what John and I are doing right now.
Yeah.
And now if there's something that's exciting, I might be standing or moving into, my different part of my studio, but it's all part of the game. So if you're listening to this, one, he's got his event October 1, 2, and 3, virtual and live. So it's a hybrid event. I'm going to put the link in the notes. If you're looking at growing this stuff, I highly suggest it. Also, his book, Engaging Virtual Meetings from Wiley. You can find it on Amazon, and also where all books are sold. You can see it here on camera. John, thank you for joining us here today. Any final thoughts you want to leave us with?
Well, Renee, I really want to share a tip from one of our top speakers. That's Elizabeth Gilbert. And Elizabeth Gilbert, over the last 4 years, Renee, gave one of the best keynotes, the best virtual keynotes still to this date. And the funny part is that while she had a great backdrop like you, that she had a right camera, right? She had the right mic. She didn't do any technical tricks, Renee. She never once shared her screen. She never once ran a poll. And how do we know it was great? Is that 38 minutes into a 45-minute keynote, Renee, is that somebody said, I feel like I'm having a one-on-one conversation with Elizabeth Gilbert in an Italian cafe. Send.
Yep.
Right. And I looked at the participants list, and at that moment, 650 people were logged in. And she's having this effect on people. And so we tore it apart. Like, there are about a dozen of us, trainers, facilitators, speakers. And we found 10 things. I'll just share 3 of them with you now that she was doing better than anybody else. And these last 3 things I want to leave your guests with, Renee: authenticity, vulnerability, and storytelling. All 3 of these don't have anything to do with tech, but if you come in here with your authenticity, a touch of vulnerability, and some supreme storytelling, you can be one of the top presenters here on Virtual. I'm John Chen, and I hope that you've enjoyed this. I can't wait to see you, whether it's online or in person. Thanks again, Renee, for this opportunity.
Thanks for being here. And those who are Amplify students and read the book, you said authenticity, storytelling, and vulnerability.
Yes.
Yeah. Those should be very familiar concepts to all of us listening here today. So, John, thanks for confirming that. Thanks for sharing your wisdom, and thanks for continuing to geek out in the world so that we can follow and learn some things. Thanks for listening. If you like this, please like, comment, subscribe, all of the things, share it. Be on the lookout. This is one that you want to watch. If you're listening to it, you also want to watch it to get some the perspective on the visual pieces of it. But that is it for today. In this episode, we will see you next time on the Amplify podcast.
Thank you for sharing this time with us. If the experience resonated with you, follow us on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or amplifymylife.com. Share it with anyone else who's ready to amplify their lives. And remember to let our hearts speak in sequence. For more from Renee Rodriguez, visit meetrenee.com.